When Travis Scott dropped Astroworld in 2018, listeners were surprised to hear a voice they didn't recognize singing the chorus to Can't Say. That voice belonged to Don Toliver, who went on to sign with Travis Scott's Cactus Jack Records, and their collaboration has continued through the release of his debut album, Heaven or Hell. Travis Scott's influence on this album goes beyond his one feature on Euphoria. The producers here include some of Travis's favorites: Wonder Girl, Mike Dean, Frank Dukes. So of course this album has that psychedelic trap feeling found in Travis's music. You can find it in songs like Cardigan, Can't Feel My Legs, and No Idea. So let's see if we can figure out what makes Don Toliver's Heaven or Hell so wavy. Most of the psychedelic sound on this album seems to come from the melodies. They're usually built around chords played by some kind of keyboard, a piano or a synth. It doesn't really matter, all of the layered on effects makes it impossible to tell. We can find a good example on No Idea.
I know that you.
Here, the keyboard is playing a group of standard chords: C sharp minor, F sharp minor, A major. They're split up with 2 shorter chords in the first part and 1 longer one in the second. It's not the chords though that make this melody sound wavy, it's the effects. We can get a better idea of what these effects are by trying to make a similar sound. We'll start with a normal piano. Here's one from the synthesizer Omnisphere. First, we'll give it that underwater sound with a low-pass filter to cut out all of the high frequencies. From here, there's a bunch of effects we can add to give motion and depth, like a chorus, where the sound is duplicated with some panning and detune, or a phaser, where a moving comb filter removes a series of varying frequencies. Here's what happens if we just apply these 2 effects. We can now see how psychedelic this sound is by putting it on a similar melody. This group of chords is in F minor, and has a pretty typical progression: 4-1, 5-6, and back to 4. This is a good start, but one instrument is too easy for listeners to decipher, even with all those effects. We need to bring in another sound, something to play a melody above the chords, and on Heaven or Hell, it's usually a flute, like on No Idea. This flute melody follows the general direction of the chords, starting high and then going down. We can make a new sound similar to this, starting with pretty much any flute sample. Here's one from Omnisphere. We then apply some of the same effects we used on the piano to help the 2 blend together. Although this flute is a different sound, so the exact same effects might not sound that great. It seems that a low-pass filter and a good chorus effect are all that's needed. We can see how well it goes with the piano we have by making a simple melody. This melody again follows the general direction of the chords underneath, coming down in the first half and then going back up again. The airiness of the flute contrasts with the percussiveness of the piano, making a subdued and trippy melody. While this loop could be enough for an entire track, sometimes the song becomes even more trippy by surprising listeners and filling in all of those empty high ends with another completely different sound. On Heaven or Hell, this is done with synth chords, like in Can't Feel My Legs.
Had to beat it up to stay inside.
These chords start playing in the second pre-chorus, filling in space that was left the first time around. It comes from a synth playing a saw wave, with an added chorus effect and a little bit of filtering to cut out the harshest frequencies. We can see how well this synth contrasts with the instruments we already have. We don't even have to make new chords, we can just use the ones we already made for the piano. This sound shouldn't be playing during the whole song, but could provide a good contrast between different parts, maybe just playing during the chorus, for example. It completes a nice balance of instruments, filling out the high end, the flute playing a melody in the middle, and the piano filling the low part of the melody with chords. The combination of all of these sounds, along with their effects, gives the melodies on this album that wavy feeling. Under these melodies are the basses, and there are a couple different ones used on Heaven or Hell. First is your typical 808, used all over hip-hop these days. There's nothing that psychedelic about the sound, it just fills out the low end while providing a good bounce. Cardigan has a decent example of this bass in the chorus. Here the 808 is working its way up to E, which seems to be the root note with the song in the key of E minor. Any number of 808 samples could fill this role, as long as it hits with a strong punch and has a really loud sub bass. Here's one for example. We can test out this 808 under the melody we already have. Since this melody is in the key of F minor, this 808 line works its way up to the root note, F, 2 times. Not every part of the song needs to be crazy, and that bass does a good job of filling the low end, but sometimes this album switches it up with a much more interesting bass. Heaven or Hell might instead fill the low end with a synth bass. It could even show up in the same song as an 808, like if we go just a little bit later in Cardigan.
Don't stick around, you should save yourself. But you can't hear my phone, you need some help.
This bass pretty much follows the same pattern as the 808, working its way up to the root note, but the sound is way different. There's more high end and less low end, making it more noticeable and less aggressive. It's also not a widely used bass sound in hip hop right now, making it kind of unexpected. This sound can be made by playing a saw wave on a synth and adding a chorus effect, but we need to remove the stereo effect from the chorus so that it sounds in the middle, the same on the left and the right. And then we can have a low pass filter quickly slide down and cut out all the high frequencies. We can see the difference between the basses by having this one also play under our melody. This bass line follows the same general pattern as the 808, working its way up to the root note. It just hits a little more often. This sound, along with the 808, make up the two most prominent kinds of basses on Heaven or Hell. The 808 fills it out in a predictable way, while the synth bass has a lot more high end, and the contrast between the two brings that waviness to these songs. The last piece of the tracks on Heaven or Hell are the drums. While this album uses standard hip-hop percussion, the amount of drum samples in any one song makes it hard for a listener to keep track of what's happening, adding to the psychedelic feeling. Just listen to the amount of percussion in Can't Feel My Legs.
To beat it up, to stay inside. Beaches are happiness, the way you cry.
There's nothing that crazy about these drum sounds, but the sheer number of them makes it hard for listeners to mentally organize. Since these are generic hip-hop drums, we can recreate them with any number of similar samples. In the low end, there's a single kick. In the mid-range, there could be a snare, a clap, a rim, and in the high end, there's a closed hi-hat and an open hi-hat. Some of the drums on this album have also been panned, or moved to the left or right side, adding to the confusion. In Can't Feel My Legs, the open hat is louder on the right side, and the clap has a slight delay between the left and right side, sounding like it completely surrounds the listener. We can take these samples, add some panning, and see how hard it is to keep track of all of them if we add it to everything we've made so far. This collection of drums wraps up the songs on Heaven or Hell. Even if they're all normal sounds, their variety and panning makes it hard for listeners to understand what's going on and adds to that wavy sound. Don Toliver has channeled his collaboration with Travis Scott into his debut album, Heaven or Hell, with a wavy, psychedelic feeling seen on songs like Cardigan, Can't Feel My Legs, and No Idea. The melodies on these songs set the mood. Chords are played by a keyboard with heavy filtering and any number of effects. Layered above is a higher instrument playing the lead melody, usually something airy, like a flute. Some more variety can even be added by filling in those high frequencies with some synth chords. The basses on this album are sometimes a typical hip-hop 808 blending into the background, and at other times a more prominent synth bass. The contrast between the two reinforcing that psychedelic sound. The drums on this album are standard for hip-hop, but their variety and panning keeps listeners on edge. Hopefully this clears the waters on what makes Heaven or Hell so wavy. Thanks for listening. Leave a comment and let me know what you think makes Heaven or Hell so wavy. Make sure to subscribe to Sound Selection on YouTube and follow on Instagram.